And we're back for another episode of Startup Hustle. Matt DeCoursey here to have another conversation that I'm hoping helps your business grow. Now, there's a lot of things that burn themselves into our memory and cause us to never forget stuff. And a good experience and sometimes a bad experience are pretty much at the top of that list. Now, with that, many marketers, businesses, startups, and other types of entrepreneurial things know this and understand that. We're going to have a very interesting conversation with a founder who is taking experience innovation to a different level with her startup. Now, before we get too far into that, as a quick reminder, today's episode of Startup Hustle is brought to you by Fullscale.io, helping you build a software team quickly and affordably. With me today, I have Adelle Archer. She's the CEO of Eterneva, and they are out of Austin, Texas, and yet another addition to our top Austin startups list. Well, let's just go ahead and say, welcome to Startup Hustle, Adelle.
Thanks, Matt. So glad to be here. Thanks for having us.
Glad to have you. I'm excited for this topic, but before we fully engage in that, let's hear a little bit more about your backstory.
Yeah, absolutely. So I also, I've been in Austin for quite some time. Prior to starting Eterneva, I was in the tech industry, so worked in tech here in Austin, but I am very entrepreneurial. Knew it was a matter of time before I started my own company. And originally Eterneva was a lab-grown diamond company. We were going to be growing into the direct-to-consumer side of lab-grown diamonds. Just really fascinated by that space. And so as we were starting that company, on a very personal side of my life, completely separate from the business that we were starting, I had my very close friend and my business mentor, Tracy, actually get diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And very quickly after her diagnosis, she passed. And Tracy was one of the most special and unbelievable people in my life. And, I am who I am today because of her involvement. And, so it was me and a couple of her close friends that, we got her ashes and we wanted to figure out a really meaningful way to honor her. And, after months of doing research, it was like, just nothing felt meaningful. It was just very transactional. And that was my first experience in foray in death care. I had not really, had that experience before. And coming from tech, you're like, man, you just have a totally different expectation of what that customer experience should feel like. And it was over dinner one night with one of the diamond scientists that we were working with that he told me, hey, there's carbon in Tracy's ashes. If we can get it out, I could probably grow you a lab-grown diamond. And so that was actually how we came upon the idea to start Eterneva, which is to honor remarkable people and pets by making real diamonds from the carbon in their ashes. And Tracy, this is her black diamond. This was our first diamond that we ever made.
I never knew that was possible. And I mean, what an interesting approach. Now, as little as people like the topic, I think it was Benjamin Franklin that said that there's a couple things in life that are certain. I think it was death and taxes. And, therefore 100% of us are at some point going to be in that target audience for the quote death care industry. Now, I want to talk, I have some other specific questions, but first I would imagine that all of the stuff with COVID and has really changed. Well, it's I and like I said, I'm certainly not an expert on the industry, and I'm hoping to avoid being a client for quite some time. But it seems that that COVID is probably accelerating or maybe even creating some levels of unmanageability. I just see I see, there's a morgue truck or something, they're having to, I don't know. How is all that affecting the industry as a whole and your business as well?
I mean, it's going to have a very profound impact. From the beginning when we had our first wave, you definitely saw the stress that it put on the overall industry, just infrastructure wise. But I think, there's so much about it that is different than what we've ever seen. This is an industry that is it's kind of a laggard industry. It still does a lot of things in a very analog way, and COVID has just forced the funeral industry to really digitize overnight. So that was one of the things that we did with kind of our consumer technology roots and backgrounds. We were able to support a lot of our funeral home partners by quickly digitizing, bringing them online, being able to have the tools that they need to, walk a family through their services. So not a line that we are getting into, but just one way that as a younger kind of tech forward, one of the modern brands in the space, we were able to help our industry players. And, then we just are seeing at a time where we can't really gather and get together for funerals, we're losing one of our most important grieving rituals. And so for somebody that's going through a loss where you can't even go to the hospital, you can't be there at their bedside when they're passing, and then you can't have an in-person funeral, this is going to have a pretty profound impact on how we're grieving as a society. And you compound that with the grief that we're already feeling just around the pandemic, and it's really tough. And so I think that that's something that as a company, we really identify as a grief wellness brand, and we're serving somebody in the wake of a loss, and how, the diamond journey and the process is intentionally designed to be celebratory and shareable and something that you can kind of rally your community around. And, we've given a lot of thought about what does it mean to grieve over a digital medium these days, because that's what we've got to be doing. So, yeah, I think not only are we, having, unfortunately, to be confronted with death, and it's becoming something that we're talking about a lot more. About 40% of people know someone who's passed of COVID at this point. But, it's something that we need to think about how we're showing up for our friends that are going through that experience and supporting them when we can't be together in person.
Is COVID creating an unmanageable volume for the death care industry?
It comes in waves, similar to just the pandemic itself. And so, I think as a whole, the industry is able to support it. It's just depending on kind of the peaks and valleys. In the beginning, when there was no protective gear, there was a deficit of protective gear. That was really challenging. So that was something we put together a GoFundMe and raised a bunch of money to basically supply funeral homes across the country with PPE gear. And Mark Cuban came out, supported it, and, was thanking them for their frontline service, because, they're so often forgotten as essential workers. We're thanking our healthcare providers and, those that are showing up on the front line, and our funeral industry needs just as much support right now.
So before I ask my next question, I need to first define, what is a lab-grown diamond?
Yeah. So a lab-grown diamond is 100% real diamond that is just formed above ground in a laboratory rather than underground, using the exact same method. It's high pressure, high temperature over time that's crystallizing carbon graphite on top of a diamond seed, and it grows into a rough raw diamond. And then we have cutters that are basically looking at it and finding the best area to cut the diamond from, cutting it. It's graded, certified, just like a regular diamond. And what we're doing is actually growing from a personal carbon source. So we're extracting the carbon from somebody's ashes or hair. And then that's the carbon source that we're using as part of the diamond that we're growing.
How long does that take?
End-to-end, our process takes about 7 to 8 months to do. Ours is a lot more intricate and involved than when you're just growing regular diamonds, because our customer is specifying, I want this exact shape and color up front. And then we're growing a completely custom diamond from their loved one's personal carbon, and everybody's carbon is different. So, you're growing one diamond in the machine at a time. So it's a really kind of bespoke and special and equal part science and art. And end to end, it's about a 7 to 8 month process.
And once again, how did you personally get into that lane?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was like we just saw lab grown diamonds as super interesting. A lot of younger people are gravitating towards lab grown diamonds because they know where it came from. They know kind of the origin of it. It tends to be more sustainably produced. And, so we just saw an opportunity there. But then when Tracy passed, it was like, man, I'm not seeing anything that's like really a special way to honor somebody. And so that was really kind of the point at which I just wanted a diamond for myself. But the more that we looked at that, we were just like, I don't think I'm alone in this. I think other people, are looking for ways to honor their most remarkable people, and are not really finding anything. And so, that's really what Eterneva is all about today. Like, we're not a diamond company. We don't really view ourselves that way at all. We're a grief wellness brand, and we're building a platform for all things celebration of life and grief wellness. And so diamonds are really just the beginning. Like, we're going to have other product line extensions, services, resources. Like, we're partnering with Baylor University right now on modern like grief theory. So actually producing original academic research, that's kind of pushing the boundary on what we know about grief and, how we can support somebody through kind of a healing process.
Yeah, now this is actually not the first episode of Startup Hustle where we have had a guest that uses some part of someone to create memorable items. We had a lady named Courtney Lane who is a very well-known hair artist.
Huh. Interesting.
So she has, she creates, really like interesting hair art. And it's, lots of like woven and just different stuff. And and it's very, she's very interesting. And so is what she does. So a lot of people have locks of hair and different stuff.
Yeah.
It could be from childhood or, people that have passed or whatever. And she does really interesting and amazing stuff with it. And once again, yet another thing I had no idea existed. That's part of what I enjoy about this show is just hearing about the things that people, I don't know, this is an interesting idea. Scientifically, it makes sense. I'm aware that diamonds are made of carbon. I had never had thought about making one with that, out of person. Now, you also mentioned that pets are commonly used. Which is more common?
It's almost half and half, honestly. I think we're about 45% pets for our loved ones. And so, it's really like, what were the connections in your life that were your most special connections? Those are the ones that you're going to do it for. So whether that, like, on a pet side, that's not necessarily every single pet. That's like, man, all of us have like a couple pets that are like once in a lifetime pets, and like, that's who you're going to do this for. Diamonds are earned.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So this is quite different in your industry. Do you now, as far as like, do you work with funeral homes and places like that? Are they your sales channel of sorts? Like, is what Eterneva does? And if you want to learn more about Eterneva, there's a link in the show notes and you can go check out what they do. But where does your business come from? Is this like another option that funeral homes offer, or is it, do you have to go out and find them on your own? Or?
Yeah. So, we actually started our company completely direct to consumer. So the first 2 years of build, we launched in Q4 2017, was really just going directly through, paid search and, a lot of social. Like, we do a lot of video storytelling. So just capturing the stories of these amazing people, and the stories behind every diamond are just like, man, they are unbelievable. Just the most incredible people you've ever heard. And, you share those out, and inevitably somebody's like, oh my gosh, like, that reminds me so much of my dad, or that reminds me so much of so-and-so's dad, and I'm going to share it with her. And so there's this kind of like organic community that started forming and building. And, a lot of amplification, people wanting to talk about this topic and, saying like, hey, I've had my mom's ashes for years and, I'd really like to look into something like this. So a lot of what we do is, just connecting with people on a very human level. And I think that's very surprising and different in our industry. Like we're the first modern consumer brand that's being built here. And I think it's refreshing for people, it's like we're taking a hard topic head on, creating a social community that people feel inspired, engaged. We have higher engagement rates on social than like Kim Kardashian, Taylor Swift, which is just crazy. And so, I think that that's just people want to be a part of kind of this mission to change a culture around death, grief, and remembrance. And then we do now partner with a lot of funeral homes as well, because that's really an education channel. That's when people are making decisions and becoming aware of what their options are. And so typically somebody will, learn about Eterneva in the home, and then they get connected to us, and, our team will make sure that they get a very consistent Eterneva experience.
Yeah, I would imagine that the whether you want to call it cultural awareness, industry awareness, that's is a challenge. I mean, has that been one of the bigger obstacles been just to try to get people to know that this isn't actually an option or that it exists?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's exciting about this is like we're a category creator, like this. Yeah, most people don't even know that this is something that you can do, but that's changing. I mean, in a huge way, and it's very exciting to see. Since we were on Shark Tank last year, that was a huge inflection point. And I think what's so interesting about it is, again, like we're coming from a place of we want to change a culture and, make this like something that's not so taboo anymore, that we don't just like kind of see as weird or, not something that's going to affect us all at some point in our life. This is just part of our human experience. And how can we have a better experience around grief and, better ways to talk about our loved ones and, just kind of make it part of our everyday conversation. And, I think that that's resonating. And we find that on average, somebody's telling 20 other people about Eterneva after hearing about us. So the word of mouth around it is just like fascinating to watch. So yeah, I think it's changing, and we're seeing a lot of kind of influencer and celebrity adoption, and just it's becoming more of kind of a normalized thing that hey, there are other ways to honor your loved one versus just putting them in an urn or in a casket.
So you said you were on Shark Tank. How did that experience go?
Man, it was crazy. It was a fantastic experience. Definitely one of the most nerve-wracking day of my life on our air date. You're like, oh my gosh, everybody in my entire world that I've ever known has reached out to me to let me know that they're having a watch party at their house that night. But it was awesome. I mean, we had a really, really great episode, very intense. The Shark Tank team said it was one of the most intense negotiations they've ever seen. But I mean, we came out with one of the best valuations offered ever on the show. Mark Cuban invested. And yeah, I mean, it was a great experience, and it is amazing to me still how many people watch Shark Tank. Like to this day, people saying, "Oh, I've heard about that. I think I saw that on Shark Tank." So, yeah.
How did that? What was the after effect of that? Did that result in a flood of website visits or inquiry or anything like that? I ask because I've talked to several people that have been on Shark Tank before, and I mean, some have had, quite honestly, some have had favorable experiences and some have not, for different reasons. I mean, I think you got to always kind of get into the result of that. But
totally.
Did other than the, just personal outreach from people and friends, did it affect your business in a positive way?
Oh yeah. I mean, huge. I think because we're such a word of mouth driven business, we knew we were reaching 7 million Americans that night. And then we knew they were going to tell 20 other people about it. So there is that initial with most companies that are on Shark Tank, there's that initial wave of inbound and people who are interested and, watching the show. But then where, it's really powerful, I think, for us is we aired October last year. So it was right before Thanksgiving. this is what everybody talked about at Thanksgiving dinner that year, you know? And then it's like when you're in your barbershop or you're at your grocery store and you meet somebody who is going through a loss and you're like, oh, I just heard about this company, you know, let me see if I can't look their website up. Like, you should really look into this. So yeah, I mean, it's been pretty amazing to see the multiple months after, you know, amplification via the second and third degree connections.
And you said that Mark Cuban was an investor
He
from
is,
that evening.
yep.
How is that? How has that gone? I mean, I'm just curious because, you know, I'm a Mark Cuban fan. I like what he does, and
Yeah.
I like Shark Tank, and you know, I quite honestly haven't watched it for quite a while, but that's not a knock on the show. But how has that interaction and involvement been?
It's been fantastic. Yeah, I mean, he's been such a huge supporter, and he actually right off the bat, like, decided he was going to make some diamonds, you know, and give them to his wife as a gift. And then he's been incredibly supportive, like, you know, with the, you know, support through the COVID pandemic, and, you know, just kind of recording a thank you video to funeral directors. And so there's been a lot of things that we've been able to do together in, you know, just a year's time. And yeah, we're grateful to have his backing. He's a great guy.
Yeah, I'm sure that's interesting. I just noticed a late surge in participants joining us for our live stream. Probably our notification probably took its time getting out. But with us today, we've got Adelle Archer, and she's the CEO and founder of Eterneva. They make diamonds out of your loved one's ashes, which is, and I love that's people or pets or different stuff, and talking about how that experience-based marketing is changing. Well, it's disruptive, and that's what I want to run into, talk about next. And before we do that, as a quick reminder, today's episode of Startup Hustle is brought to you by Fullscale.io, helping you build development teams quickly and affordably. We've worked in and around quite a bit of disruptive things. So in regards to disruption and what you do in your industry, how is that being received? Like, I mean, give me an example of a good and a bad.
Oh, that's a great question. You know, I think whenever you like people do view disruption as cool and interesting, but, you know, you are disrupting a status quo, and, you know, some people don't love that. And so I think, as I'm an optimist. I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs are. You know, you see the opportunity, and you want to be the change. And for us, there's just so much. There's so much to change in a positive way, I believe, around the death care industry, just giving people a better experience all around. You know, you don't hear a lot of people leaving kind of a funeral home experience as a raving fan, you know, and saying, wow, like that was a really important experience, a really valuable experience I had at a very difficult time. And, you know, that's kind of where we want to get to, is just serving more grievers than any other company in the space, so that we can really ensure that they're just having a good experience all around. But, you know, I think it's a sleepy industry. There's a lot of players that, you know, have been the biggest players for, you know, for the entire time. And some are embracing and looking to us to figure out how to engage with people, you know, on social media, for example, on kind of younger demographics. Like, we have content that consistently goes viral on TikTok. And I think that just like blows the minds of anybody in the death care industry. They're like, how do we become relevant on TikTok? You know, but then I think what's also interesting is like while we don't view ourselves as a diamond company, you know, we're still using diamond technology and, you know, have a diamond supply chain. And, you know, there's definitely between lab grown diamonds and mine diamonds, you know, just a kind of it's an emerging technology that's disruptive to the mine diamond space. So, you know, we're very thoughtful about positioning ourselves, you know, over in death care. That's very much where we're at. But, you know, you still get the mine diamond advocates that they're just throwing shade at lab grown diamonds as they do. So, you know, it's an interesting place to be. But I think that's what's exciting about disruption is, you know, you are being the change, and it's a change is necessary. So you got to be the one to go do it.
Yeah, it was when we were talking earlier about you were mentioning your direct to consumer approach, and I couldn't help but think man, how do we sit down and figure out what the keywords are on those Google searches? Just like, I've been a party to a lot of marketing meetings and a lot of stuff. And that I'm just, my mind kind of thinks like that. I was like, man, what do we look for with that? Now, obviously the, death and loss, just experience in general. Well, that's nothing that anyone signs up for. And it's not like, now you mentioned earlier, you're talking about, COVID and other stuff. So my mom is in a memory care facility because she has advanced dementia. And I experienced a lot of that too. I've had to have some interesting conversations with my family very recently, which was like take her to a hospital if needed, because it's already quite advanced, but we wouldn't be, if we took her there, we can't get in.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think a lot of people don't realize like how much COVID is affecting things that you in some levels take for granted or have the ability to do. Like, for example, once again, like if you take someone to a hospital, like if you took your husband or wife to a hospital for something right now, and once they're in there, they're not going to let you in. Right. Even if it's like, hey, so-and-so is dying, and you're like, yeah, we can't let you in. And now from an experience standpoint, let's be realistic, that's pretty shitty. Yeah. Like I said, this whole experience it's never something, well, I can't say never. I'm sure that there are some people that have died here and there and people rejoice. But that said, it's not really the norm. And you also get to deal with people that are going through, in many cases, the most significant amount of stress and anxiety in your life. How do you deal with like your approach to that? Because it's, and I'm struggling for a term, say, you handle it with kid gloves or whatever. Like, how do you have to go about shaping everything you do to be sensitive, caring? There's obviously religious things that come into play here and like all of it. And it's so varied. I can imagine that that's probably a challenge. Well, is that a challenge, and how do you handle it if it is?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, so much in that. My heart goes out to you with your mom, because I know I have a friend who's going through the exact same thing, and it's so tough. And I'm really glad that y'all are having those conversations, because the worst thing that can happen is, just not thinking about that and getting yourself into a situation where you haven't thought about it in advance.
Well, that's why we're having them. Yeah. It's kind of me that pushed for some of them, because it's like, hey, we'll talk about it if, and I'm like, well, that's not. Yeah. There's other things too. Like, well, I'll give you just a quick example, but so like if we had to take her over to the hospital for any reason, it's possible that based on the condition, the place that she's at now might not let her back in.
Yeah.
So those are the things you're having to plan for. They're the shittiest conversations that you want to have. But yeah, so sorry, continue, please.
So important to have, and I'm proud of y'all. And we have one of our influencers who had done this process. Her dad was actually diagnosed with COVID, and it was just like she texted me this video of he had been in the hospital for something like 6 or 7 weeks, and she didn't get to see him, and he had he was close to passing, and then rallied, and they transferred him to another hospital, and that was the only time she got to see him was from the parking lot as they pulled his gurney out and put him into an ambulance. And it was just so emotional. He was waving at them with his oxygen tank on. And it was like, man, like that might be the last time you see your dad. It just really hits you. It really does. So yeah, love on your loved ones extra hard right now. But I think, as we think about our approach and we've kind of developed just kind of this Eterneva way about how we engage with somebody who's grieving. And I think that that's really unique about what we do is just meeting somebody with a very open heart. I think the only thing that can really mend a broken heart is another healing, or is just another caring one. And I think what is just misguided about our approach when we engage with somebody who's grieving is dealing, kind of wearing the kid gloves and kind of being more reserved and kind of like very monotone and, kind of cautious. And, you end up, if you're somebody who's grieving, you just feel like you have the plague, and you're like, what is wrong with everybody around me, and I don't feel like I have an outlet, and people aren't inviting me places, and it's just there's so much more to manage on top of all of that. And so I think like going in, one of the first things we do with our customers is on the phone we'll say like, hey, I kind of in getting to know us, like we're not really going to ask you like what happened or how your loved one passed. That's not what we want to know. Like we genuinely just want to know who they were as a person, and like give us all the good stuff. Like we really, really want to help you celebrate them over this period of time, because what's unique about I think what we do is it has a 7 to 8 month lead time. So we're going to be with somebody over that period of time, showing up for them again and again and again. So we learned all about their loved one, and we have traditions like inaugurations where we actually take their photo and on Instagram and Facebook Live, and we tell their story to the world and inaugurate them to our wall. We have every single one of our loved ones, up on our wall, as little Polaroids. And, it's just little moments, it's little kind of rituals like that. And, as we're going through the process with our customers, it's, showing up for them every month and having pictures and videos and updates of the process, and, giving them something positive to look forward to, remembering their loved one's death day, remembering their birthday, and just reaching out and being caring, and, not treating them with kid gloves. They feel like you're a friend that gets it. And that's just so important, is just somebody feeling like they can let their guard down and just be real with you, and that you're kind of a safe space for them to go at a time that everybody else doesn't really know how to engage.
That same description that you just laid out, it got my attention, because I've talked to people who have had businesses that have failed. And they've had that same kind of reaction about other people's reactions. They're like, hey, I tried something that didn't work. It doesn't, like, don't ignore me.
Exactly.
Like, you don't have to talk to me differently. Like, I'm dealing with it. It is what it is. But that's been
fascinating.
That's actually been because in some ways that's a death in the family in a different way.
It's totally something to grieve. Yeah, man. Like,
yeah. But part of it is like people just want to, at some point it's like, well, it's the same way that if, it's like, I don't know, celebrate the good things. And see what happens. Now, speaking of hopefully celebrating good things, how has raising capital been for a business like this?
Yeah, I think what is so interesting kind of about the journey, like looking back on it now, is in the beginning you are kind of getting people on board that like, I promise you this is a thing, and other people are going to want to do this. And, it was a very different idea when we first started out that, again, you're creating an entire category, so there's not a lot of reference point for them to look at. But I think what worked for us really, really well in the beginning was we did a strategic angel round. So we went to other founders and entrepreneurs who have had, good size exits, both on the consumer side and technology side. So our first group of investors were raving fan, early adopters, wind at your back, badass executive CEOs, founders, and they've just been amazing. And that was kind of our early support group. And then from there, we went on Shark Tank and we received Mark Cuban's investment. And then we raised another round, and that was our first institutional round. So by that point, there was a lot of signals. We had a lot of like pretty high profile folks that were involved. And now have about 5 different institutions. And now there's just a completely different attitude around this entire space, because of COVID. I think a lot of VCs and investors are, starting to develop theses around the death care space. And, so it's a totally different conversation today.
It makes sense. If I think about, industry innovation and things that, I often look at anything. All right. Well, I'll give you an example. We just did a presidential election. I feel like the polling, like, I don't mean voting, I mean polling. Like, that whole industry feels very ripe for disruption.
Right.
It doesn't seem like anything's changed, and it's so off, and I don't know what the issue is. It just feels like and maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. Now, when I think about death care, and I don't have an inside look in the industry, but it feels like something that probably hasn't gone through much, if any, innovation. And there are things too that you look at COVID and we see some, it's really supply chain stuff. Like death is actually quite predictable. Meaning like they meaning, whoever it is that's looking at different stuff. A lot of times it's the insurance industry that does very good at actuating this kind of stuff. But they, and then all of a sudden you get these things that throw stuff out. Like, why did we run out of toilet paper earlier this year? It wasn't because we can't make more toilet paper. It's because there's a very predictable nature to how much and how often people will buy it. And then when things occur, you're like, all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow. Okay. So this is a little different. And I would think that death care could have something to do with that. Another thing too, is with the rapidly rising population worldwide. I mean, theoretically you have a bigger audience now. People live longer, different stuff. I don't know. So have there been any big disruptions or innovation in death care and loss industry that like anything that's even notable? Because I like I said, I don't know, but I'd struggle to
think of anything.
Think about what it would or could be.
Like, not really. I think right now we are only just now beginning to see, some true innovation here. And there's a handful, and really, I do mean a handful of other companies that I would say are really going to drive some incredible change in the space. I would say there's a lot that's being done in the pre-need space. So thinking ahead and planning, kind of making sure your will is all drawn out and, thinking about all of those things. So a lot of that is, we're building better technology experiences around that to make it more accessible, relatable, that people are going to do it. So we're seeing some innovation there. And then, there's another company I love called Better Place Forests. So that's another option to honor a loved one is their entire like redwood groves in California and Oregon and a couple other places where you can pick a redwood and you can have your loved one's ashes interred under the redwood. So just a more beautiful kind of setting to go and to visit your loved one's resting place. And then, there is some really interesting things that are being done around aquamation. So this is a water-based cremation. So it's more kind of green and sustainable. There's a lot of innovation that's happening in green burial. So more kind of sustainability practices around both cremation and burial. So I think that's something that we're really going to see. But, I think what's unique about what we're doing is we are the only company that's really focused on those that are left behind in the wake of loss and what they are, what their grieving journey really looks like and how can we add value during that time so that they're pathing this way, on a healing path and not getting stuck, so that's really where Eterneva really focuses.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like I said, this has been insightful because I think that once again, your industry is something that many of us don't experience or honestly think a whole lot about until we're forced to.
Right.
Which is, and we've done, I'm a big, I study a lot on personality styles and largely how they interact and, what that has to do with team leadership, team building, stuff like that. But the one thing that is certain is that we all show our worst qualities when we have stress, and that's like when we're tired or when we have stress, and when you go through grief or loss, those two are mighty prevalent. And that's why I was asking about some of the messaging and how you deal with that. And if you've ever known anybody that was in the industry, like an undertaker or someone like that, they're very good listeners, and they are. You mentioned that kind of monotone. They're not like, "Hey, welcome," like that's not. It's not usually what you're looking for in that regard. So very interesting,
right? I think you want to feel not just heard, but understood. And, like somebody's, they're there with you. They're there to get your back and to support you and that you don't feel alone. That's really what it is like, it's a very isolating feeling. And that's what we're trying to correct is how does somebody not feel so alone while they're grieving?
Yeah. And, all around, whether it's in death care or anything, it's amazing the power of empathy. and how I mean, everything from negotiation to team building to leadership to I mean, really, like, empathy is it's a cornerstone element
100%.
of all of it. And
100%.
it's a challenge sometimes too, because as people we really are programmed to be more of I than we. It's a basic survival instinct. And then it's I think that I've thought a lot about empathy this year everywhere from things that went through COVID. And I have 200 employees and they're worldwide, and that was a challenge for me. I was in the Philippines earlier this year when COVID hit, and I've never gone through a more stressful and maybe also period of growth, but having to stand in front of, that empathy for, you take 185 employees in one location, now you're going to multiply it, because it's not just them, it's their husbands, wives, children, and in the Philippines, they have more nuclear families. So it also goes the other direction too. So now you've got sometimes their parents are living with them and trying to make decisions that make sense. But empathy has been very powerful, and it's difficult. It's difficult and it's not. It's it's difficult to I don't know. For certain personality styles, it's very built in, and for others, it's not. And entrepreneurs often trend towards that type A driven side, which empathy isn't a built-in quality, and that's why I spend a lot of time trying to study it, because I'm just trying to be better at it myself. But all right, so I end my episodes of Startup Hustle with what we call the Founders Freestyle, and I'm going to give you a chance to either talk about anything that we may have missed in this episode, or give some general advice to other founders that you may have learned from your entire process in general. So here you go. What do you have to say?
Hey, well, if I were to kind of use Eterneva and what I've learned so far is every single year is an opportunity to really think about who do you what do you stand for, and what is the problem, the bigger problem that you're solving? One of the first things that we invested in as a company was our brand identity work. And this was back when we were bootstrapped, before we ever raised money. It was like a $10,000 investment. I remember being like, whoa, okay, this is a big deal. But it was one of the best things we ever did, because it was again, we're not turning ashes into diamonds. We're honoring remarkable lives, and we're a part of making sure somebody's never forgotten. And then the next year we did our brand identity work again. We're actually, we're even more than that. We're serving somebody on a grieving journey, and the experience that we've created around the diamond is as important as the diamond itself. We're actually a grief wellness brand, and then the next year we kind of re-looked at ourselves and we're there are no brands that are being built here, and we're driving this conversation and this community, and there's this mission that people are rallying behind. Why not become the platform, that really you can build a lot of things on top of and just really reshape an entire industry, so we want to be the lighthouse of death care. And so I think that if you're really intentional about thinking every single year about what is your company and what's kind of that greater why for what you're doing, and it kind of expanding, if there's an opportunity to, the scope of who you are and where you're going, I think it's what rallies people behind you. It's how you create raving fans. It's how you attract investors and great talent, and that you do something that is not just a transaction, but rather a mission that people want to get behind. So that'd be my 2 cents.
Well said. Yeah. Well said. One of the things that I took away from this episode, and that I'm an advocate of, is there's a certain I'm a capitalist, and but at the same time, that doesn't always mean, that's not a take no. thing. And I think a lot of people view business and capitalism as just that in many regards. Yeah. And at one point I may have as well, Startup Hustle has provided me the opportunity to talk to so many people that do so many different things, and realize there's so many people that have used a quote capitalist type venture to create so much good.
Oh, yeah.
in the world. And, and I can't remember the name of the episode, but earlier this year we had a guy on that there's even a Netflix documentary about, he's a part of it that he had created, that is creating 3D homes.
Yeah.
And they could go into like Central America and create, use this 3D home printer to make concrete homes that had, they basically cost like $1,000, but it was changing, whatever. And it was, that's another example what you're doing and so many others. And, I think overall, it does always start with a problem that needs to be solved.
100%.
And then on top of that, often things do occur for reasons that you cannot explain when they occur. And, with your friend and, saying, oh, well, we could do something and, bringing it up and trying it and, not being afraid to do something that is different. And in a world where unique and new ideas are few and far between, there's something to be said. Matt Watson and I have talked about this so much in past episodes that, there are riches in the niches. And when you go out and do things, especially when you're trying to raise capital, you have a better chance of getting it doing something like what you're doing than if you are the 15th person in line and doing something else where you're just going to hear it's a crowded space. It's going to be tough. There's an 800-pound gorilla in the room or whatever. And, so now, with that, there comes a lot of pressure because whenever you're first, if you're doing anything that other people get and understand, and it seems like every time you get funded or get on Shark Tank or do something like that, you've now sent up a signal to competitors and saying, hey, so with that, don't rest on your laurels and assume that, just if you are first or one of the first, there's more are coming. Yeah, totally. So you got to keep pressing forward and keep trying to do things the best, the better, faster, cheaper, and just do it all. Just keep pushing forward. Don't ever believe that competition isn't coming, because it probably is. So, well, this was interesting, and keep it up. I'm interested to see where all of this goes. You've taken it a long way from Shark Tank to everything else. So I wish you the best of luck. And I think it's pretty fair to say we'll probably circle back around down the road to see how this is continuing to go for you. So, all right. Well, in a sign off that I have yet to use, I want to say, stay positive and test negative. So see you all next time.
Thanks, Matt.